Hello, and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host, Rob. Today we're going to finally be finishing off my series on the Whitespire campaign that I ran, and at this point we're into like the tier 4 stuff. The players are pretty much like, I think they start today's stuff at 16th level, but obviously they go, all the way to 20 in this campaign. And where we last left them, they were approaching the city of Azai, which is like this cursed city. The people there are all immortal because they made a pact with like these ancient elder beings, most particularly one called the Lion of the Night, which is a name I stole from George R. Martin, of course. And they have all become immortal, but no children can be born in the city now. No animals can survive past like a day or two. They all just get sick and die for no apparent reason. Plants all die. Like, the city is pretty awful. And just like the city of Ashai from George R. Martin, there's like this river, and the river's like black during the day, but at night it kind of glows with like green fluorescence, and there's all these blind fish swimming in the river. And I just thought it was an interesting and very ominous type of city. The buildings are like 90% of the city is completely empty and vacant, and the people usually go around wearing masks, not for any specific reason, but mostly because they just don't want people to see who they are. Because, they kind of, at this point, they've been alive for hundreds, if not maybe thousands of years even, who knows, I haven't really even decided. And then there's this legend the city was actually there since the dawn of time, because all the buildings are like black and it looks like they're drinking in the sunlight. And that when the world ends, Azai would be the only thing that remains. Now, who knows if that's true or not, but I just thought it was kind of cool and ominous sounding, so I threw it in there. Anyways, my players have actually gone there to find Macros the Black, the most powerful necromancer in the world, the most powerful in thousands of years at this point, because our player character Magnus wants to learn from him and study and learn more of the arcane arts, especially the arts of necromancy. And Macros himself isn't really like evil. He's not like a black wizard. It's just a name, right? Mostly he became a necromancer because his sister died when he was very young, and he wanted, to understand what happened. And because his talents ran towards the arcane rather than, the divine, he started to go down the path of necromancy and became very obsessed with it, and became like the most powerful necromancer that has lived in thousands of years. Although I will say that I think Magnus does surpass him by the end of the campaign. Either way, though, very high level wizard, and the party have come here to find him. And the party themselves are quite high level. I also had this thing going where magic in this city was actually more powerful. That was one of the things that had attracted people here, and part of the pact, I'm assuming, as well. And so we actually had these tables I took from, I think, Kobold Press, and it was kind of like their version of the Wild Magic Surge tables instead of like the Wild Magic Sorcerer. So I kind of took their tables and some of my favorite effects from the Wild Magic Surge table and basically made my own table, and then I just roll on that. And mostly I wanted things that were going to be related to that spell, right? So it wasn't you were getting different spell effects, because mostly your spell was just operating at a really high level and often beyond your control. So for example, you might cast a magic missile, but instead of just hitting the one target, it hits everything within like a 50-foot radius, including yourself, including your allies, just everybody, right? And it just missiles everywhere beyond your control. Or you might, just be like a Gatling gun, and instead of just firing off your magic missile with your level 1 spell slot, it automatically casts at like a 9th level spell slot, even if you don't have 9th level spell slots, and just, mows down that one particular target, right? Something along those kinds of lines was more what I was looking for, right? And it gave the city a cool feel and a kind of spooky, ominous atmosphere, but it was also a lot of fun for the players because their spells were awesome in this city, so they loved it. Anyways, they do indeed meet Macros, and they begin kind of like working with him. He, of course, reveals that one of the things he's found is that there is, like, upriver, where this black river or green river, depending on what time of day it is coming from, is from this place just called the City of Corpses. And at the heart of that city is something that he wants to find, which is a gate into like the realms of death, right? And he wants you go through the gate and see what's on the other side, essentially, right? He also tells the party, when he sees that the Knight of Dawn armor, he actually realizes that Shadows of the Paladin might be interested in something that he knows of, which is the location of the Sword of the Dawn. Now, he doesn't call it that, but he tells her that near here there's like an island, and there's rumored to be like this, this like dungeon. And in the dungeon is a sword that came from another world, and on it is a symbol of the sun. And he looks at her armor and her shield. And one thing I should point out about the Knight of Dawn's armor and shield and sword, I don't know if I pointed this out before or if I really specifically mentioned it. One thing I did to stop it from being too powerful too early was that I basically decided that each piece on its own, the armor, the shield, the sword, was only a +1 piece of equipment. But if you combine them, each other piece improved all the pieces. So if you had 2 pieces, let's say you had the sword and a shield, each one would be a +2 item. If you had all 3, they would all become +3 items, and the sword took on the properties of a Holy Avenger, and the armor could actually like sprout wings using your Channel Divinity option. So only clerics or paladins could really use that option, because it literally took a use of your Channel Divinity. It didn't give you a new one. It just gave you a new Channel Divinity option you could use, and it would give you flight, right? So I just thought that was kind of a cool image or a cool idea, right? And the wings were actually like, they weren't like bird wings or anything. They were just like wings made of light. They looked like they were made from like the light of the sun. I thought it would be a cool image. Picture like the Diablo 2 angels, if you've ever played that game or know what I'm talking about. Or even just Google it, because they look pretty wicked. Anyway, so that was kind of the idea there. And so if she gets the sword, she'll have her +3 Avenger. And at this point, everybody's items, like Crag had this axe ever since the beginning. And then as he got more powerful, the axe kept getting on more and more properties, which I mentioned last time, I think. So anyways, that was kind of the idea behind a few of their different items. And of course, the Bard has his soccer ball that belongs to the dead goddess of beauty and arts and music at this point, because all 3 goddesses joined together and then died, of course. Magnus has his robe of the Archmagi, and I believe he got a Staff of Power as well that he took from the guy he beat in the duel at Hollowfaust. I can't remember for sure, but he definitely had a Staff of Power at some point here. And it was either from that guy or maybe from this Lich that they ended up killing later. I can't remember which. But either way, the party at this point is fairly well equipped. Our Arcane Archer, of course, has his magic bow with the string from the braided hair of the Queen of Witches. And, so the party's starting to become quite powerful. They've all got like +3 items at this point. Each one kind of has their own personalized thing as well, which is kind of nice. So they end up going to this island. They fight a bunch of like the guards that have been left there to guard the sword. And basically my idea was that because the sword, it couldn't really be like handled by like undead or demons or devils or anything like that. So it was mostly like human cult followers of the Lion of Night who took the sword here and hid it because they don't want their master to ever be slain, in his home plane especially. So he did die in the in-between. But I'm kind of doing the whole thing where, like, the gods have like different manifestations in different realms and different planes of existence. And so does creatures like the Lion of the Night. He's not really a god necessarily. He's more like a demon lord of sorts. But either way, he's kind of on that level. So my idea was that he'd have, he had a version of him in the in-between. He has a version in our plane and, in different realms or whatever, right? Now, the thing I thought was kind of cool about this is that, in a sense, it's actually a trap. So the party ended up fighting their way through to the end of the dungeon. Part of the dungeon ends up collapsing on them when they don't spot one of the traps and activates. But the party manages to live, of course, because they're 16th level at this point. And they find the sword, and the paladin takes the sword. But my players, being quite clever, they manage to figure out that the sword doesn't seem to be working properly. They get into another fight, and the sword hasn't seemed to improve like the armor or the shield. Nothing's actually gotten better, and they realize that it actually seems to be some sort of cursed weapon instead. So they managed to survive the encounter with these demons. They cast Remove Curse or whatever it was. I think it was just Remove Curse on the paladin and managed to get rid of the cursed sword. And then the paladin decides to use her the one like detect evil or whatever, they can sense like undead or fiends, and for probably the only time ever in history it's actually useful, as she senses below them, below the sword chamber, like directly below, there seems to be some sort of like entity down there, which is a fiend or undead, right? So sure enough, they manage to find the secret way down, and they come down into the actual chamber of the real sword, end up having their big fight with whatever the guardian thing was. It was just a powerful demon. I think it was like a Marlith or something like that. And she had like 6 magic swords, but most of them were fairly not powerful. She did have like a flame tongue, and she had like a frost brand, and most of them were like +1, +2 weapons, right? And of course, in the room though is the Sword of the Dawn. So they managed to get the sword. They go back to Azai. They decide to go upriver to the City of Corpses, and here they end up fighting something called the Ghoul Emperor. And I should probably just find out what the heck. Once again, things I probably should have had prepared before we began, but you know how it is. Oh, see, there's the Queen of Night Magic that I'd mentioned before, and here is the Queen of Witches. So if anybody was curious what she looks like, she's just this red-headed witch with tattoos on her face, and she's like 9 feet tall. So she's basically the mistress of like all these hags and other types of things like that as well that all follow her. Now, if only I could find Ghoul. There we go. All right. So one of the things that was cool about the Tome of Beasts and Kobold Press in general is they have like sidebar stuff talking about different, creatures in their world, right? So in this case, they have like, see the off-colored page? They have like an entire page talking about the Ghoul Empire, the Ghoul Emperors, etc. And then of course, in the flesh, the undead flesh, the Ghoul Emperor himself, right? And he's a CR20. This guy's no joke, right? He's got like power word stun, power word kill. He's got some pretty hard-hitting spells. He's got legendary actions. He has a reaction of blood armor where if he takes damage from a creature that he can see, he can do necrotic damage equal to half the damage back to the target. And he's got lair actions. He's a pretty powerful guy. And of course, I gave him a bunch of minions. So this fight ended up being quite good. However, they do also have not just the party themselves, but they also have Macros the Black with them, of course. And so the party, they overcome all the minor challenges. They're in this city, and the city's in like this canyon in the middle of the mountains, and the canyon walls are like so steep that the city almost never even sees daylight. Right? It's just like buried in this canyon, and even like high noon, there's like barely any light that ever gets through it, right? So they're not actually subterranean. They actually do live like on the surface, although parts of the city are subterranean as well. And then in the Kobold Press world, their Midgard world, the ghouls are actually at war with like the Dark Elves and stuff, right? With the Drow. And they have like this war for the like control of whatever they call the Underdark. Mine's the Deep. I don't know what theirs is called. But anyways, so the Ghoul Emperor was, like I said, no joke, and it gave me a chance to use a pretty cool NPC with some really interesting, unique abilities, and to use some of the ghouls, because they have a lot of like CR4 and 5 type ghouls that are, pretty beefy. Some of them have like a lot of hit points. Like this one type of ghoul here is only a CR5, but it has 143 hit points, and that's a lot of hit points on a CR5, right? It doesn't do a lot of damage, is the thing. But still, that's a lot of hit points to try to beat through for minions, right? So anyway, they end up having the big fight there. In the end, they overcome him. They manage to get to like this thing just called like the Death Gate, and it's just like this black sphere. And using this talisman thing they find from the Ghoul Emperor, they're able to go through into the realms of whatever it was that this thing serves, which of course turns out to be the Lion of the Night. And now they actually find like they come out into like this black void, but it's kind of like the astral plane, except it's just all black, and they're all kind of floating. So picture space, but they don't need oxygen, right? And in the distance, they actually see the city, and they see like lights from it, and they realize the city seems to be under siege. And when they like head towards the city, they manage to find out that the city is actually like run by a bunch of like dragonkin. So Crag and Shadows are pretty excited, and there's like all these different types of like dragons that actually live in the city as well. But they're under siege from this army of demons, which is controlled by the Lion of the Night, who turns out to be basically the ruler of this realm. And this city is like kind of like the last holdout. Everything else has essentially been destroyed, and now it's just this one city. But all the defenders of this realm have all kind of come here too. So it's kind of like the Castle of Last Hope, except this one's with dragons. So the party managed to like help them and fight off some of the hordes, and eventually, of course, find themselves in conflict with the Lion of the Night himself. And unfortunately, I should have tried to make it a little more fitting, where like maybe Shadows would get the killing blow. I don't think she did. I think it was Crag actually kills Stealer. But either way, they have their big epic fight. He's got like a ton of minions with him as well. Once again, you know, the wizards like dropping like force cages and walls of force and everything, and the bard, you know, is using all of his high level spells. I think at this point he's probably like 17th level as well, probably. So the party has a lot going for them. And I based the Lion of Night off another creature I probably should have looked up, but it just occurred to me. I might as well show him as well. And he's actually a devil in this book, but he looks like a lion man. So I just decided to make him a demon, because that's what I was looking for. So this is from the Creature Codex, also by them. And this is Archdevil Parselin. And yeah, so that's him. And then he has these like cat things that, or lion creature things that like serve him. So yeah, I just put a bunch of those things in, and they spent a lot of time trying to heal him. This guy's a CR25 creature, so again, not exactly a joke, right? And he had an ability, we could summon barb devils. Of course, I replaced those with demons and whatnot. He also has like high level spells, including Foresight. So I decided that he had already cast Foresight on himself. And needless to say, 20 armor class, when attacking with disadvantage, is not easy to hit. Even for Crag, who, you know, has reckless attack and was able to counter out the disadvantage, you know, it was a pretty tough fight. But in the end, the party plus Macros the Black managed to win. Macros decides to go back to the Dragon City and continue to expand his knowledge of the universe and learn from them. That's kind of his thing, you know. Like I said, he spent a year apprenticing himself to each of the 7 pilgrims from Hollowfaust, and, you know, just trying to learn everything he can, right? That's kind of what he is. Basically, the guy's just immortal at this point, and he just wants to learn everything he can possibly learn. So he does that, but he also spends some time teaching Magnus his higher arts. So I gave Magnus basically like the level 1 or 2 Death Cleric ability, whatever one it was, where if they use a cantrip, a necrotic cantrip, and there's another target within 5 feet, they can also hit that guy. So I just basically gave him a special ability. It did cost him 2 points of his constitution, because he had to like give up part of his life force to like master this new form of magic. So I wanted there to be a trade-off, but, you know, he used things like Toll the Dead constantly all the time. So that was like his go-to cantrip for damage. So he was quite happy with it being able to hit a second target. So, you know, he thought it was fine. And I also made it so that his necromancy spells would automatically be treated as if they'd been cast like 1 level higher, right? And then he could upcast them normally, but if he didn't upcast them, they were always treated as being one level higher. So after that, the party returns back to Whitespire again. They end up helping some of their old friends from the Thieves Guild. They met back at like level 2, and they're having problems with this vampire guy who's taken over like kind of like the underworld scene, and is like, he's basically become this crime boss, right? So they go to help him. I think they actually might have helped him before. I don't remember for sure. But either way, they end up fighting the vampire lord. The only thing that's really of note here is that this guy has like his 7 vampire brides, because I needed more vampire brides than the Red King had. You know, the Red King, he had a few, but this guy, you know, this guy's the real player here. Anyways, One of them, though, was some vampiress who he identifies as a Lilith, but she's not really a vampire. So when the party shows up, she takes one look at them and she's just like, well, I think your time is done now, Malachor. Peace out. And she just starts casting teleport. And so the party, we have like this house rule. It's not really a house rule, it's actually an optional rule, but where you could use Arcana to try to identify if somebody's casting a spell, what spell it is, right? So the party decided to use that, and they realize that she's casting teleport. And it's funny because there's a minute when they're like, do we counterspell it? Or do we just let her go? And then in the end, they're just like, well, what do we care? Let's just let her leave. Like, if she wants to leave, she can leave, you know? So they just let her leave completely. But as she's teleporting out, Crag gets this voice in his mind, which is hers, telling him that she'll see him again on the Valis moon. And Crag's kind of like, how the heck am I going to get to the moon, right? You know, and she makes some comment about him being the singer of the dragon song, right? And the party had earlier used legend lore trying to find out more stuff about like the prison of Bahamut and stuff. And they find this prophecy, which of course has mostly been long forgotten because the followers of the K have destroyed most of this knowledge. But we'll assume there's still a few scraps of it here and there that might be known. But they find that they get this prophecy about, you know, only one who has lived the lives of his ancestors can, you know, do this, and only one who's done this can do that, and only one who's who sings the dragon song can like open the prison or whatever, right? And of course, I can't remember what the second one was, but that one was Crag. But the first one, of course, was also Crag because he'd gone back in time and lived through the lives of his ancestors and just seen these like brief scenes of his history and you know, going back to his genealogy, right? So, and of course, the axe is called Dragon Song. So she's not really singing the dragon song; he's more just carrying the dragon song. But you know, technicalities, right? Anyways, so the vampiress Lilith, of course, really turns out to be Bellatrix, the Widow of Lust. And at this point, she's figured out who the party characters are, and she's figured out that Crag has the axe, and he seems to be this like prophesied guy to open the prison of Bahamut, which is what she wants, because she wants Bahamut and Tiamat to fight, and then whichever one wins, she's going to try to destroy them while they're weak after their battle against the other, right? So that's kind of her grand plan. She wants to like destroy the dragons, and you know, so she needs Crag to open the prison for her. So at this point, she's gone from like being indifferent to the party to being kind of a bit of an enemy to the party, and now being like a temporary ally who wants to exploit the party and kind of even help them so that they can help her to release Bahamut. And then, you know, she plans on betraying them once that's all been said and done, right? So anyway, that's kind of her game plan. Anyways, I found it funny though, because the vampire lord Malachor, he has no idea that she's actually a demon queen. He thinks she's just a vampire. So even he was deceived by her, which I thought was kind of a nice touch. I thought it was just funny. Anyways, they ended up destroying him. Like I said, he was more of a footnote. The main thing was the meeting with Lilith. They also ended up meeting this Lich, who actually, I think they met the Lich earlier. I might have this out of order. But either way, back when they were like level 1, Alatar's first night in Whitespire, he just sees this like black coach that seems to be pulled by like these skeleton horses go by, and he's just like, what the heck was that? Well, that turns out to be this Lich who just lives in Whitespire, right? And he wants to basically try to take the power of the Dread One for himself. The Dread One was this super powerful cleric who lived like 8,000 or 8,500 years ago, and this was another thing I stole from Talos, of course. And the Dread One had once been like this powerful cleric of good, and him and his companions were like the greatest heroes of their age, and they defeated all these like evil entities and whatnot, and gathered up and just tried to destroy a bunch of these evil artifacts. But some of the ones they couldn't destroy, they decided they would like lock them away and imprison them so that none of these, you know, evil cultist type guys could find them and try to keep using them, right? However, a couple of the artifacts in particular turned out to actually be like sentient things, and they began to like whisper into the mind of the Dread One. Now, in Talos, he actually had a name. In my campaign, he didn't, because I decided that I didn't want him to have a name. I thought it made it more mysterious. But I also like the idea that since this guy turns against the light and becomes like just like the greatest villain of their world kind of thing, that really is more that like everyone just decides to strike all record of his name from every book they can find. So this isn't even the case. This is just other people helping him do his work, you know? So anyways, he ends up being corrupted and tries to actually destroy the gods themselves at one point. And his main plan was that he was going to destroy all the mortal worshippers of the gods, because of course the worshippers give power to the gods, and this would weaken them enough to the point that he thought he might be able to bring them down with all of his artifacts that he'd been gathering. And I kind of liked the Dread one. I thought it was an interesting idea. So it was something that had kind of been there since the beginning, but I didn't want to like talk about him a lot in the earlier videos because it wasn't going to be relevant until this one. But he's somebody the party kind of known about, well, everybody kind of knows about ever since the beginning of the game, right? Anyways, so this Lich wants to try to get into the Citadel. So one of the things he tells the party members when he ends up meeting them is that Ghoul the Half-God had wanted to try to steal the Dread One's power for himself as well. And he had created his own fortress that was like below the main fortress where the Dread One was, so he could be close to it and study it. And when Ghoul disappeared, he'd been working on this thing called the Chaos Engine, which he thought could maybe pierce like the dimensional barrier to whatever keep it was where the Dread One's former allies had banished him to after he was defeated. Oh yeah, so I should probably mention that he was defeated. Anyways, all of his former companions, the other great heroes of their age, eventually like united against him. They all fight against him, and in the end they managed to bring him down and kill him, right? But they decide to banish his castle entirely to like this little pocket dimension that nobody else really knows where it is or how to get there, and return back to the world kind of thing, right? So this way they actually do seal the artifacts away in this pocket dimension with, the slain Dread One, right? So Ghoul decides, he invents the Chaos Engine that he thinks is going to pierce the barrier between the dimensions and get him into the pocket dimension where the Dread One was. And spoiler alert, he was successful, but just, failed from there. So that's what the Lich wants to try to do. And he kind of wants the party to sort of try to help him. But of course, he also tries to betray the party, and he, disappears on his own way, right? So at this point, the party find out that they need, so Bellatrix had also mentioned something about the Valus Moon, but she said something about the Dark Reliquary as well. Sorry, I'm kind of messing some of this up, but whatever. So the Dark Reliquary turns out to be this prison, essentially, run by the Inquisition. And it wasn't really begun by the Inquisition, it was actually begun by the Dread One and some of his allies. But they've kind of like built over it. So the first few levels are like kind of weird. You got like the typical prison type stuff. But as it's like going, the party end up encountering Lucian, the guy with the pistol from the Inquisition that they helped back when they were like level 3 or 4, right? And he talks about how there's been kind of like this like coup attempt in the Inquisition, and the followers of Tiamat have tried to like take control of everything and have killed a bunch of the other leaders and whatnot. And him and some of the others have all been in prison, but the party managed to help them escape and stuff. And he helps them to get to like the lower levels, right? Because he actually knows the upper levels, at least, of the dungeon, right? And they start getting down to like the lower levels. And like the third level in particular is actually like each door is actually like a little pocket dimension where some sort of powerful entity has been imprisoned behind it, right? So the party end up going through some of those and fight a few of those things for really no point, but a lot of like CR20 plus type creatures in here. We're talking some pretty powerful stuff, including this one demon lord named like Typhon or something. I think he's from the Creature Codex. I think it's like a CR25 or something, and so the party ended up fighting him, and it was a pretty rough fight, needless to say. So they end up beating that guy. And then they're just like, okay, no more doors until we know what we're doing. That was a terrible mistake. I think somebody might have even died, but they got resurrection spells, so whatever. But anyways, they finally managed to get through to this thing called the Moon Door, which of course is this gateway leading to the Valus Moon. And on the Valus Moon is the prison of Bahamut, inside like its own pocket dimension, of course, right? So sure enough, they managed to fight their way. They get through the Moon Door. They get to the prison of Bahamut. They go through. There was a bunch of tests and stuff like that, and trials that they had to pass. and I took them from some dungeon I found, but I liked them because there was a lot of puzzle solving and less combat. We had a lot of combat earlier, and so I liked the fact that we had some problem solving puzzle stuff, and it was like really good. And there was like some, I can't remember, it was some prophecy or something in that adventure, but I just like completely rewrote it so that it would fit like what I was doing and fit all the stuff with Dragon Song, of course. So the party ended up finishing all that, and they end up meeting. Oh, well, yeah, so they finally get to the chamber. They're trying to figure out how to open it, right? And then they hear this voice. And so the party decide to like hide this, like all these pillars and stuff around this like giant cube type thing where they're assuming Bahamut is imprisoned. He is, of course. And so they hide behind these pillars. And the pillars are massive. Like each pillar is like 20 feet around kind of thing, right? And the roof's like 1,000 feet high, right? The room is just absolutely massive. It looks like it was built for Titans or something, like Greek Titans, I mean, you know, because it was built by them probably, who knows. Anyways, into the chamber appears the former Crown Justice and the initiate from the temple, Leandrin. Now, of course, if you've been watching my videos, you know that Leandrin isn't really just some poor little acolyte from the temple of Dawnblast. She's actually just like the disguise being used by Bellatrix, the Widow of Lust. And it was funny because even though the party couldn't remember like anything really about her, they all remember the Crown Justice, and then they're like, wait, that's that chick that he was having the affair with, and all of a sudden like this pieces start fitting together, right? So then they're like, well, what are they doing here? Like I thought we were going to be meeting the vampire chick, and then she's just like, oh, you haven't figured that out yet, and all of a sudden she just changes and looks like the vampire girl, and then she starts like changing forms, and they start realizing they've actually met her several other times as well, or seen her or whatever, right? And then finally she takes her true form, of course, as the Widow of Lust, and she's got her giant wings and you know, everything else, looking very similar to the mural they'd seen in that one temple back in part 1, right? Or part 2, sorry, part 2. Anyways, so she wants to try to help them, but of course the party realize that she's probably up to no good. So they end up fighting her and end up having this big battle, and she's got a bunch of other servants as well. And of course the cleric guy's trying to heal her, and she was like a CR 26 or 27 or something. She was very, very powerful. But most importantly, she had 30 charisma, and she had the ability to like charm or possess people, basically like, just dominate their minds, right? So she manages to dominate the mind of the arcane archer. And I've already mentioned how much damage this guy does in the past. Yeah, he decides to just turn around and start shooting the wizard with arrows, and he action surges. So he just, and the funny thing is, Magnus decides to cast shield just to try to save himself some damage. It didn't matter. He did, like, freaking Rin did not miss one single shot, even with the +5 bonus. All right, so he's just like boom, 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 puts a bunch of arrows into Magnus. Magnus goes down, and then he just like uses his movement to like walk over, so he's like only like 5 feet away, and just puts more arrows into the downed and unconscious wizard, who of course just dies because he just, you know, automatic death saving throw fails, right? Just boom, boom, boom. So the wizard is actually dead. Now they do manage to get Rin back. Like Rin does a bunch of damage to somebody else the next round. I can't remember who, probably the bard. But anyways, they finally manage to stop that. She then manages to possess or like mind control essentially, or dominate, whatever you want to call it, Shadowza. So Shadowza actually like does some damage as well, lays a couple smites onto a couple of the other party members. But because she has ridiculously good saving throws, and it was a kind of a fluke that she failed even the first time, honestly, she does manage to break out the next round when she gets her saving throw. So she's only possessed for like the 1 round of combat. Bellatrix also, despite being incredibly beautiful, also has like this scorpion tail stinger thing that did like poison damage, and she ends up like dropping, I think maybe Crag, I can't even remember, right? And so like 2 of the party members die, and this is like, well, Shadows is still possessed as when the second party member goes down, and I'm just like, this is not looking good. I might have overestimated the party strength or underestimated hers. But they'd already beaten so many like CR 20 plus and even like CR 25 type creatures. So I was like, I mean, you know, how bad can it be? But I forgot that possessing party members is kind of like a 2-player swing. It's like, it's bad enough if somebody gets knocked unconscious and then you lose them for part of the battle. But when they actually join the other team, that's actually much worse than being knocked unconscious. So this fight is like literally just like down to the wire. Like at one point you got like a couple party members still up and that's it. You know, but they do manage, like I said, Shadows manages to break free of the control, so then she's back, and in the end they finally manage to like swing things back. And Bellatrix is a fiend, so you know, Shadows is just like laying the smites into her with every single hit at this point. And you know, in the end the party managed to stand triumphant, and Bellatrix is dead. Former Crown Justice Bracken is dead. The other like acolytes and worshippers that she has in her like small cult that she brought with her are all dead. They managed to resurrect all the dead party members and then decide that they're going to take a long rest because they figured Bahamut's been in here for like thousands of years. 8 more hours isn't going to kill him. And I'm like, fair enough, because Tiamat doesn't really know the party's here. She's not really keeping an eye on it. But when Bahamut breaks free, she's gonna know. And I knew that like the next fight with Tiamat was going to be equally rough. So I wanted to make sure they had a chance to replenish all the spell slots and heal up. And like I said, half the party did die essentially. 2 out of 5 anyway. So you know, not exactly the best. Anyways, sure enough, they figure out how to finally like open the prison, and Bahamut emerges, and then he begins speaking to them, and Tiamat, of course, shows up. And with Tiamat are these 5 adult dragons. I didn't want to make them older because my plan was that the party's probably going to have to fight these 5 dragons at once, and that's going to be pretty rough as it is. Even if you're using things like Force Cage and Walls of Force and stuff like that. I mean, A, the dragons are quite large. They may not even fit into a Force Cage in some cases. And B, there are 5 of them. And then the idea was that Tiamat and Bahamut were going to kind of square off, and so the party wouldn't really have to deal with Tiamat directly. The idea was that they'd kill all of her like consort guys that she brought with her, and Bahamut and her would basically like stalemate each other, and then the party would, you know, get in there at the end and kind of help sway things towards Bahamut's side. But Crag did not get that memo, so he was constantly trying to help Bahamut in the fight. And I think he died twice trying to fight Tiamat. He like dies, they like resurrect him again, and then he like dies again, and then he get resurrected. And he was so angry because he like shamed himself in front of Bahamut, you know. And then to make things worse, I really kind of dropped the ball on this. I'm usually very aware of the fact that players kind of need these like big payoff moments, right? And I hadn't really thought about Bahamut giving them any sort of reward or anything. It's just, you know, he's a god, basically. Like, he's just like, thank you, mortals. I have much to attend to since I've been in prison for thousands of years. Peace out, you know? And the crowd's just like, that's it? He just thanks the group and it doesn't even say anything to me? Ah! It's like, rage, barbarian rage. And yeah, he was quite bitter. It took us a couple weeks to kind of get him to calm down. But that was kind of my fault, because I should have remembered that, hey, this is kind of Crag's big moment that he's been building to. A simple thanks, peace out might not be good enough, you know? So I did rectify that in the next campaign, because they end up helping Bahamut in another fight. And this time, I made sure that, you know, I managed to have Bahamut recognize Crag and gave him like this mark on his head that all followers of Bahamut would recognize and stuff. And, you know, and it gave him like I think it gave him like a couple magical powers of different sorts, right? Nothing huge, but he had like advantage on all like persuasion and deception checks with followers of Bahamut and stuff, right? And anyways, so I should have done that kind of stuff the first time around. I just wasn't thinking about it. I kind of figured freeing Bahamut would be its own reward, and apparently it wasn't. So that was my bad. That is on me. I said I should have taken that into account. But anyways, indeed, they do have their big fight. Despite Crag constantly getting killed by Tiamat. And the party just taking like so many breath weapons, needless to say. So the party's all trying to like spread out. They're trying to fight near the other dragons, which does kind of limit the dragon's ability to use breath weapons, right? Like the red dragon's having a hard time breathing fire on somebody who's fighting an ice dragon, because then they're going to hurt the ice dragon too, right? So that was pretty decent. And the fight itself was, again, like really, really rough. So my party's had some like just big, tough fights here coming down the home stretch, you know? But they do manage to kill their 5 adult dragons, even without the help of Crag, because he's too busy laying at the feet of Tiamat over and over again. And manage to win the fight and realize that the prison is still open and they don't really want to kill Tiamat, so they decide to just imprison Tiamat instead. And basically, they manage to like kind of force her back towards the prison entrance, and then they like open the door again, and Tiamat basically just gets sucked in, and then they like shut the prison door, and Tiamat ends up being imprisoned in, you know, the former prison of Bahamut, which we thought was a nice way to kind of wrap things up there. So anyways, at this point, the party, after not really being thanked much by Bahamut, he just like, thank you, mortals, and teleports them back to Whitespire, and then, you know, he teleports himself back out as well. The party end up going into the spire, which is this pillar basically created by the Dread One when he made his fortress on the top of the pillar, right? And they like fly up to the halfway point, which is where Ghoul's fortress is. So if this is the spire, Ghoul's fortress is like this ring around it halfway up, and then the Dread One's fortress, which is no longer in our dimension, of course, is up on the top, right? So anyways, they enter into Ghoul's fortress and fight their way through some of the guardians that are still left. There's not a lot, though. There's not a lot of combat in this one, which is probably good because we've had a lot of combat in the last few sessions, right? Between Bellatrax and Tiamat and the Lion of the Night and, you know, just everything. They've had a lot of fighting lately. So anyways, they end up going into Ghoul's labs. At some point, they end up meeting the Lich. The Lich that was trying to steal the Dread One's power for himself. So they end up teaming up with him, but they do realize this guy's just going to betray us again at some point. So instead, the party decide eventually they're not going to wait for him to betray them. Once they've reached the part where they've basically gotten to the Chaos Engine and realized, like, okay, this is how Ghoul, like, this is the portal thing that he uses to enter into the Dread One's fortress, then they're like, game on, buddy. And they attack the Lich. They kill him quite easily. At this point, Alatar has rejoined the party. So Rin's kind of left, and Mike decided to go back to his original sorcerer. So Alatar has come out of retirement from but tending the eternal flame of the burning god. And he has rejoined the party again. And Rin has gone back home to be a hero to his people and bring back the magical bow. And of course, do whatever great heroes do. Anyways, which probably includes a lot of, doing a lot of wood elves in his case. Anyways, so they betray the Lich, they kill the Lich, they end up going through and they, encounter some different stuff. They end up finding out about Alatar's backstory and stuff. They end up meeting his mother actually, and she's still alive. And of course, she talks about how she was seduced by this bard, go figure, and basically he'd ended up betraying her though and had stolen the baby because he was actually worshiping some sort of secret cult thing. And so of course that's how Alatar ended up being lost, and then at some point he'd been found by the gnomes, and the gnomes had raised him and stuff, right? So we ended up finding out all his backstory. He gets a chance to save his mom, where she'd been imprisoned in this castle in this frozen wasteland forever. Although time moves differently here. But then eventually they managed to enter into the fortress of the Dread One himself. And they end up going through all the various different levels of the dungeon. Finally, there's a few things to fight, so they overcome some of these challenges, of course. But finally they come face to face with the Dread One himself. And the Dread One is really just this animated suit of plate mail that the Dread One had once worn when he was alive. And I should have mentioned, they also meet they also find, I should say, Ghoul the half-god, who is basically dead. His body's been destroyed. But they see like this golden cage, right? And the cage seems to be radiating some sort of powerful magic. And when they get close to it, they can't even pass, like, the cage has like bars, but they actually physically can't even pass their hand through the bars. So it's almost like this magical barrier, right? And they see this like mist like moving around inside the cage, but it can't get out either, right? And they hear it like whispering and kind of laughing and gibbering. It seems to be like completely insane, right? Whatever this mist is. So at one point they end up asking it like, who are you? And it tells them its name is Ghoul. And they're like, holy crap, this is Ghoul the half-god. He's like locked in this soul cage thing. And they're like, well, probably shouldn't let this guy out, so let's just keep going. It'll be relevant in the next campaign, trust me. Anyways, so they do find Ghoul. Ghoul's been destroyed. He tried to fight the Dread One, was defeated and locked away in the soul cage. Anyways, the party though have much better luck. They fight the Dread One. The Dread One has like this book, and the idea of the book is that basically it was like one of the major sentient artifacts that helped to corrupt the Dread One and turned him evil, right? And it's actually not even like a book, essentially. It's like this being from the far realm, but in our world it like manifests in the shape of like this book that's all weird and evil looking, and it's made out of like flesh and stuff, and all the pages are like, it's a disgusting thing. But either way, the book itself is alive, and within its pages is every single spell for every single class in the game, and the book can actually cast any of those spells as its action, right? And the book also has like legendary actions and reactions and stuff too. It's basically just an extra combatant here, right? So they end up fighting the Dread One, and eventually they decide to like just kind of like kill the book, because it keeps like, oh, the book also had like a legendary action of like casting. It was like a legendary reaction where it could cast counterspell in addition to its usual reaction. So the book was starting to become kind of an annoyance for them, because it's like counterspelling a lot of their stuff, right? So they're like, okay, the Dread One's a cleric. He doesn't have counterspell. The book does. Let's kill this effing book. So they finally like destroy the book while killing the Dread One at the same time. And they manage to basically win, and everything kind of finishes, right? They managed to bring the Dread One's fortress back into our reality. And at first I didn't know why they wanted to do that, but it became apparent because Magnus decides to just take over the fortress and keep it for himself. But Magnus, being lawful evil, also decides that once everything's kind of settled down, I ask all the players, like, okay, basically the campaign's over, and we're kind of doing epilogue stuff. I'm like, okay, what's your character going to do? What's your character going to do? And Shadows decides to, like, basically, like, becomes one of the leaders in the Temple of a Nun, right? And, you know, Alatar decides to, like, go back to his friends with the Eternal Flame and stuff, right? And, you know, I'm asking everybody what they want to do. When I get to Magnus decides that he wants to become the new Dread One. And he feels like the biggest obstacle to this will be the other player characters. So he decides to use a wish spell to banish all the other player characters into some other realm so that he can begin his quest to become the new Dread One. And that's kind of where the campaign ended. So, needless to say, we had a lot of players who were not very happy with Troy at this. But I told them, I'm like, don't worry, I've already got an idea for the next campaign. And I don't think any of them really remembered me saying this at first, because they were kind of angry about this for a while, right? And Troy's defense was like, I told you guys from the beginning, I was lawful evil, I was going to betray you, and I wanted to be the Dread One. What were you expecting? You know, that's what I did. So I'm like, not the best ending though. I usually do not like player versus player type of stuff in my campaigns generally, but that's what he decided to do, and I decided to just go with it. So this would lead directly into the next campaign, which is the Broken Lands campaign, and I'll do a bunch of videos talk about those ones too, but I just want to kind of explain one thing really quickly, which is the first thought I had as soon as all this stuff started happening. And I was like, I've got a bunch of unhappy players here, but I don't really want to like DM intervene and say like, no, you can't use a wish spell for this, because that's kind of lame too, you know? And, you know, if one of the players wants to be a jerk, like, who am I to overrule that, you know? But I did start thinking, like, what if the next campaign, the new group of player characters end up having to save the old group of characters, because they're not dead, they've just been banished to some other realm, And, Magnus never specified which realm. He just wanted to banish them to some place where they couldn't interfere with his plans to try to take over the world and become the new Dread One, right? And I was like, well, that would be an interesting campaign. They level up the new characters, and at some point, they rescue the old characters, and the two groups together team up to, do whatever, bring down Magnus, do whatever. I wasn't absolutely sure yet what that end plan was going to be, but I already had the idea that, I like this concept of the two groups, the one group saving the other group, and then the two groups together having to, overcome some sort of, huge, gigantic threat kind of thing. And both parties, and they get to play both characters. They get to play their characters from the Whitespire campaign. They play whatever new character they're playing. They're playing both at once, right? And I was like, man, that would be a really great finale for the next campaign. So that's what ends up happening. And while I feel like the Whitespire campaign was better than the the Broken Lands campaign overall, the final act, especially that tier 4 area play, even tier 3 and up, I'd say, from the Broken Lands, was pretty epic stuff, and made me pretty happy. Some of the fights, I mentioned this in a different video, but literally one game session was just a 3-hour fight. That was the entire game session. So that was a little disappointing, but it was both parties at once, and the one party's fighting in one plane, and the other party's fighting in the other plane. And the idea was they had to both win their fights almost simultaneously, within the same round of combat, right? So they're actually using spells to communicate back and forth and stuff, and see how the other party's doing and stuff, and they're trying to coordinate everything. So in my mind, this was just going to be the greatest fight ever. And it definitely had a lot of really cool elements to it, but it was one fight, and it was 3 hours long. So maybe a little too ambitious for even for me. Either way, though, we'll cover all that stuff when we get to the Broken Lands campaigns. I really enjoyed the Whitespire campaign. If anybody makes it to the end of this video, hopefully you enjoyed me just talking about it and stuff, and some of the ideas from it. Like I said, I steal stuff from other people all the time, and then I change it around to fit whatever my concept is, or I just have to flush stuff out. Like the city of Ashai in the Song of Ice and Fire was kind of the inspiration for Azai, right? And there's something upriver from Ashai. It's been mentioned a couple times, but we don't even really know what it is, right? So a lot of this stuff I had to come up with, okay, well, why is Azai the way it is? Because we don't know why Ashai is the way it is, right? So I have to make up my own stuff. We don't really know what's upriver from it, right? We know that there's some sort of evil heart of darkness or something that's been called, right? But we don't know what that is. We don't know what's there. Some people speculate that maybe it's the Lord of Light or something like that Melisandre worships, right? But we don't know, because it's never been revealed. And of course, Martin's never going to finish the books, so it never will be revealed. And this is all kind of side stuff anyway. It has nothing to do with the main plot, right? So unfortunately, to me, that's the most interesting stuff from the world of Ice and Fire. It's not even really the main stuff. It's all this other stuff that's hinted at and stuff. Watch some YouTube videos on the 5 forts, and you'll see some pretty cool stuff that all happens over in Essos, which has nothing to do with any of the stuff on the TV show. But to me, it's some of the most interesting stuff. But like I said, it's all just stuff that's hinted at, and whispers and rumors and legends, and so you don't know what's true and what isn't. But when you want to start stealing some of that stuff and putting it kind of equivalents into your own campaign world, you actually need answers for a lot of that stuff, right? So then you have to come up with something. So I have the Corpse City with the Ghoul Emperor and the portal into the Lion of Night's realm and stuff, right? It's not really the Death realm, but the Lion of Night's realm, right? And the Dragon City, where they still worship Bahamut, of course, because his memories have not been erased there, and all that kind of stuff, right? So hopefully I did a good job of coming up with stuff. I don't really know. I'm sure that if Martin ever came up with anything, it would be probably way cooler than what I had, but he never will come up with it, and we all know that, as much as that pains me. But either way, that was the campaign. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you made it all the way to the end of this video. But yeah, that's everything. So feel free to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and most importantly, leave me your comments in the comment section. I love reading people's comments, That's one of my favorite things about having a YouTube channel, is being able to interact with the people who watch my videos and, you know, read their comments and the suggestions and stuff like that. And, you know, just see different people's ideas and input. Because there's tons of stuff that I never think of on my own, or that just wouldn't have occurred to me. And then you read somebody else and you're just like, oh man, that's a cool idea. I wish I would have done that. Or maybe I should try that. Or maybe I should do a video on that at some point. So, you know, personally, I love that kind of stuff. But anyways, that's everything. Thank you for watching. Bye.